Perfect. Welcome back to the Nerdy Neighborhood, everybody, and welcome back to your Friendly Neighborhood comic show. I am your host, Lauren, your Friendly Neighborhood Bye. And of course, we've got co-show host Chase somewhere
Howdy, everyone.
And we got some special guests, as you can see tonight, who we're super excited to talk about. We're here to talk about a very specific Kickstarter that's going on right now, and we've been, a little more absent lately, Chase and I on the channel due to being busy with life and everything. But this Kickstarter is just so important; it's so unique, and these are some really great peeps. So we thought, why not go live and talk with some good people and all that? So, Aubrey, CK, welcome. How are y'all?
Good. Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. Aubrey, I love the headset.
Thank you. I told you guys I'm like traveling right now, and I even packed it so that I'd have it. So I'd have good audio.
That's perfect. That's perfect. And CK, I like the paint you have back there. Is that, I can't tell if that's flowers or waves or what is that back there?
It's pretty abstract. I look at it as waves though. So
okay.
Yeah, it's my favorite painting that I have. I have a big collection, but that one's my favorite. So I was like trying to get it in the frame.
Sweet.
Well, eye-catching.
Thank you.
It is. It definitely catches it. It's interesting to me because you got the blues there, but then there's some brown. That's why I was kind of like, could that be something else? I don't know. I like it a lot though. So I want to see how it looks because I know we have 4 people here, but we have the Kickstarter right here. I don't know who would like to start between Aubrey or CK, but whoever would like to kind of, get us into the Kickstarter a bit first, what is this about? Clearly we can see it has to do with disability, neurodivergence, all that stuff. But how this anthology gets started, and what's your role in it, and what's the general purpose of it?
Take it away, Chris.
Oh, okay. I was gonna say the same to you. So Aubrey Lyn Jeppson and I are both editors on the project, along with Anas Abdulhak. And basically, what it is, it's 64-page anthology. It's multi-genre, so we got horror stories, sci-fi, fantasy, romance, etc. And it's 12 stories in total. And we have about 25 creators in the project. And so that's the gist of it. I don't think I answered your question though. Did you ask how it started?
I'll say you got a couple of them. So what's your role in it, and then how to get started?
Okay, so I'm one of the writers, a writer on one of the stories, and then basically what happened is I'm disabled. I have fibromyalgia, and I've had it for 20 years. And basically, I became friends with Aubrey Lyn Jeppson a couple of years ago, and Anna shortly after that. And we got really close, and I was kind of like, I want to put together another anthology because Aubrey Lyn Jeppson and I both worked on Scott Snyder Presents Tales from the Cloakroom Volume 1. We were editors on that project. And so I was like, I would really like our next one to be about disabilities and neurodiversity because Aubrey is neurodivergent and I'm disabled. And we wanted to kind of merge that together into an anthology. And so that's kind of how it was. It was kind of like my brainchild. And then Aubrey and Anas have really helped me bring it to life. So I couldn't have done it without them for sure. They're definitely huge editors on the project, huge roles to play. And so that's pretty much how I got started. And that's my role in it, and I'll let Aubrey take it from there.
Yeah. So Chris covered some of it. Like I am an editor and a writer on the project, and I'll also do lettering for my own story. I have diagnosed ADHD and undiagnosed autism. I have talked to a few professionals about the autism side of things and did not seek a formal diagnosis because there's still a lot of stigma, especially in the US. Like if my family ever wanted to move abroad, if God forbid, like my sister and her husband passed away and we needed to take over the kids, having an autism diagnosis can be a barrier for that. Like, so it's not something I formally sought, even though I know I fit the criteria and things like that. And so I don't know, like it's just a way for us to share like the things we face in various creative ways. And I even before we had really discussed like this anthology, I'd had this idea for a story of like around autistic pattern recognition. And so I don't know, everything just kind of flowed together for this project. It's been really fun so far.
I love to hear that in terms of it kind of flowing and hear about how the three of you like basically found each other, kind of with the common goal of, hey, we've been wanting to, in your own separate ways, I'm sure, kind of tell important stories that have a common ground of like having to do with disability and barriers and neurodivergence. It's so cool what can happen when people come together, and when people kind of find that common ground. And I think that definitely makes it even more special because you guys sent us samplers to read so that we can kind of have more an idea of this Kickstarter as well. And I could feel that and this, and even just those three stories in terms of how much care was in it, and to the point where you allow certain stories to be told and they seem to be very uninhibited in a good way. So that's really cool.
Yeah, when we went through the submission process, we did it like an open submission. We wanted the anthology to be open to everybody that wanted to apply for it, whether it be your first story out the gate or you're an established creator in the indie community. And we just went with we had a huge chunk of great stories, and we picked the 12 that we were really, really digging the most. And we didn't want to put any barriers on the stories whatsoever, like you're saying. We really wanted it to just feel like if it was one of the best stories, then it's getting in the collection, and that's all there is to it. And we really, I think we had enough to where we're actually considering a volume 2 if this one is successful. And we already have a little bit of a chunk where we're like, hey, we're going to invite them, and because we really wanted to include their stories, but because of financial restrictions, we had 64 pages to work with, and that's what we had to stick to that. Even though I was sitting there telling Aubrey and Anas, I was like, can we just add like 1 or 2 more stories, please? And they were the realistic ones in that scenario where they were like, no, we got to stay at 64.
Yeah,
So
we kept having to hold CK back and be like, nope, this is where we're starting, and volume 2 will happen if we can get this thing going.
Yeah, it sucks having to be the one to hold people back too. You're like, of course I want to say yes, but also reality sucks.
Yes. Yep.
So, since you had the 64-page cutoff, was there like portions of some of the stories you had to edit out or cut down or have them change, or did you try your best to fit it all in there?
We did have to adjust a couple of stories. We had to go back with them and say, hey, is there any way we can work this down by 2 pages? Because we really want to fit your story, but we don't have enough like runway for that. And everybody was really good. Everybody was super flexible and willing to work with us. And I think I've taken them. So my focus has been editing the last like 4 years, comic book editing. And I mean, there's a lot that goes into comic book editing, but I remember when I was taking classes from various teachers, like I've taken like a workshop from Kelly Sue DeConnick. I've taken a lot of classes from like Shelley Bond, and there's something about being able to edit down a story and make it tighter fiction that really shows how good a writer is and a comic creator is. Like I'm always impressed when people are like, yeah, I can do that, because like there's only so much runway with panel space too, so I think that's a real skill when people are willing to not only work with you, but like are like, yeah, I can do that. I'm good at that,
That's awesome, because I can imagine that can be a hard conversation to have with a creator.
It's definitely intimidating for us. Like it's intimidating for me to be like, hey, can you do this thing for us?
But what's really satisfying is when they come back and say, I think the story is even better now.
Yes.
Because we edited it down. And we only had to do it with like 3 or 4, but we really analyzed each one. Thankfully we have good editorial eyes on it, like Aubrey's, and I'm gonna toot my own horn. I'm pretty good at it. Not as good as Aubrey though. But we're definitely able to look at them and go, okay, this is the one that we need to ask to cut because it has a little bit of filler in it. Versus this one is already super tight and we can't shorten it anymore, kind of thing. But we only had to do it, I think, with 3, maybe 4 stories in total. So a third of the collection, something like that.
That's excellent. Did you have a total number of pages you would allot to each story?
Yeah, they submitted. So we said 2, I think it was 2, 4, 6, or 8 pages for stories, and that's what we wanted initially. And so they really got to decide how much they wanted to take when they submitted. Like we didn't dictate like, hey, you only get 2 pages beforehand. Like we had discussions afterwards, after they were submitted, after we knew kind of what we wanted in the first volume. So yeah.
And I was a little scared because it was like, what if all the best stories are 8 pages long, which means we're only going to get to include like 8 people. But thankfully, we had we had somebody submit a 1-page story that was really, well, it ended up being 1 page. They thought it was 2 pages, but that's one of them that we asked to edit down. But we ended up having, 1, 2, 4 pages that were excellent, some 6 pagers, some 8 pagers. So we ended up getting to run the gamut of length and stuff like that, which I think will help when we order the collection as well. Is kind of break up the flow a little bit. I think that'll help us out.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I really liked hearing y'all talk about like, because like you said, it can be really tough and maybe even make you feel bad to tell somebody to cut their story down. And yet in writing, being concise can be very helpful. I know I struggle with that because I'm a very fluffy writer. So normally I'll have like 3 to 5 drafts of something at least before I can even get close to a finished product, because I will write something, think it's perfect and great, and then 3 days later go back to it. And I'm like, nope, we're changing we're cutting this out. You just chop it to heck. So I totally get that.
First draft case loves adjectives.
Mm-hmm.
I find that a lot of people either are fluffy writers or they're I'm a skeletal writer. Like I get like a thing down and then I add like the musculature and the veins and skin and stuff. So it's interesting. But we all benefit from editing. Like that's something like I've learned so strongly as an editor is like everyone benefits from editing, and anybody who's really resistant to editing, you got to build your muscles to be able to take editorial feedback and figure out where you want to fight on things, like and not fight. Like I always tell my clients, like this is not an adversarial relationship. This is a complementary relationship. We are both honing your vision to make it the best vision it can be. But figuring out like which heels you're ready to die on with me and say, nope, I want that in my story, or those kinds of things. So, and with this, it's been a really smooth process. Like everybody's been really receptive to our feedback, and it's been nice so far.
That's well, you can tell in the 3 stories I've got to read so far. It's very solid. It's concise. I'm enjoying what I've read so far.
Thank you. It's good to hear. But Lauren, I'm with you. I'm kind of a fluffy writer. I have to like edit down. But then now I've gotten into quite a few anthologies the last couple of years. So now I'm used to writing really short stories that are really compact. And now I'm trying to write something longer. And I keep thinking scenes have to be really short. And so I'm trying to like learn to let scenes breathe a little bit more. So it's an interesting dichotomy now. I'm having to like switch tracks and get used to something else.
Like a pacing issue?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. And I feel like that's not talked about. I'm sure it is with you all as creators, with other creators, but I think especially with maybe like, just general people that read comics. I think that's less talked about, where, because people will criticize writers left and right all the time, or any creator. But yeah, people don't think about, unless you end up doing it often. Oh, well, they're so used to writing anthologies. Now they get this, ongoing series, and it's amazing. In terms of, you're like, I love this writer, I can't wait for this. And then the first few issues, you can kind of tell that they're trying to get the hang of it as a writer, which is totally valid. And then people get really upset because that writer didn't write the exact same as they wrote, maybe anthology or something they really loved. And it's like, give the writer a break. Like, understand they're doing that format, because eventually, as long as the writer, can still do that format, they're going to figure it out.
Well, I think that's where a good editor would come in too.
Oh, absolutely. Because that's the thing too. Like, I mean, we talk about how editors cut down things, but editors can tell people to add things too, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, like, you can say this doesn't make sense, or, I understand a lot of times it's things like, I understand where you want the emotionality here. I know where you want this to like hit somebody's heart, but we haven't built to it, or things like that. You can definitely add that in and discuss those sorts of things. And I think a lot of it's just figuring out, comics is such a unique medium. And I know we say that all the time, but it really is. It's not the same as like novels. I've seen people come from various other mediums and try to like interpolate it right in, and it just doesn't. You have to learn how to work with being concise in your script so that you're not overwhelming your artist or your letterer or your collaborators, like figuring out what the rules are and where you can break them. rather than just running in, like I know that can be the impulse of a writer to just like run in and create. But when you're in comics, you got to think about like how much weight am I putting on my artist, my colorist, my letterer,
Right.
because we're a team and we're all telling the story together. Every person in that team is part of the storytelling process. And
Right.
so I think that I'm hoping that will shine in this book as well, because we've got some really solid teams. Because like we did ask for like portfolios when we were doing the submission process, so we got to see what kind of like artistic background the artists that are involved in this project had, and like what kind of like the letterers and the colorists as well. And so I'm just excited to like be able to showcase all of that talent for sure.
Yeah, you've got so many people listed on the Kickstarter, which I think is so great, especially too, because especially with the anthology, it's so easy when you have so many careers involved that people, some careers can get lost, I guess, or they're less spoken, and it's I don't think it's ever intentional. I think it's just one of those things where there's so many people involved and so many stories. But yeah, you guys do such a great job, I think, of making sure you highlight everybody, and also like highlighting even just one page or panel or something from each comic, so everybody can kind of get the feel of each one, which I think is especially important in anthology, because anthologies by nature have so many different styles and things like that. And ironically, I think with people that do have disabilities or neurodivergent, things like that, that can be kind of intimidating actually in reading anthology.
I have something actually real quick to throw in and ask. You were showing the pictures there of the Sinister Compulsions story. And as I was reading it, I was wondering, obviously this person's like some kind of OCD or something like that, but do you guys, is there a way, like, do you explain what it is that the person is dealing with in these, or is we just come out of it knowing they're dealing with something and we just need to acknowledge that everyone has something going on?
I think it depends on the story. In mine, there's like a note at the very end that it's about autistic pattern recognition, because the story doesn't explicitly say this.
Okay.
Because not every story is going to say that. Not every story is going to explicitly say, this is what it's about. Like some of them are more creative. Like it's not a, what's the word I'm looking for? Like not all of them are infographic kind of style comics. Most of them aren't that kind of thing. So it's not always implicitly mentioned, but like you grasp it. Like Ari struggles with OCD, and Ari and I actually work together a lot. So like it was really interesting for me as someone who's edited a lot of his work to see that script and to see that whole thing come together, because it's
Intense.
yeah, it's intense, and it's a different kind of intense than some of his other work is. And I thought that was really fascinating, just as someone who's edited for him a lot.
I thought the illustration layout was great in it too. It's all very well done.
Oh, Alyssa is so talented. I love her watercolor work. Like it's such a pretty, even for such an intense story, it's still like there's so much beauty to it with her watercolor stylings. So
she's one to watch. She's been in several anthologies the last couple of years, but that's pretty much the extent of her projects. But she's definitely one to watch. Alyssa Meyer is. She's just absolutely amazing. And I keep trying to grab her. Like I wanted her to do my story this time, and Ari beat me to the punch because we all kind of know each other. This little group does, from Scott Snyder Presents Tales from the Cloakroom, and I was like, oh man, like she's already been grabbed. And Alyssa was like, "Oh, sorry, I can't." So I keep trying to work with her. I've worked with her one time, and I want to do more work with her because she's like Aubrey said, she's just so amazing.
She's also a very talented writer. I've edited one of her scripts. I don't think it's out in the world yet, but like she's got the chops all around. So she's definitely one to watch.
Gotta love it.
Yeah, but getting to kind of piggyback off of what Aubrey was saying, I think Ari's story might be one of the few where it's not like it's not as an easy of a read to determine what exactly the condition is. Like, we have one that's about a spinal cord injury. That's pretty self-explanatory. Mine, I actually addressed it as fibromyalgia, and I actually do have kind of an infographic built into it to explain it, because it's about my story is about my journey across the last 2 decades dealing with it. So it's like how I came to terms with it throughout the years. And so some of them, more like the disability side, I would say, are definitely easier reads or more explicit, or it's just obvious on the page. The neurodiverse stories might be a little bit more of a implicit kind of thing. Like, I know we have one that's about a robot that has ADHD, and I can't remember if that one I can't remember if they flat out say that they have ADHD or you just read into it. But I think for the most part, it's like you said, Chase, you kind of pick up on it.
Yeah.
Well, I just know that every diagnosis isn't the same. Even if it's the same diagnosis, it's not the same.
Yes.
So I just didn't know how like precise you could be into saying what people are dealing with. You saying there's a robot ADHD story is interesting to me because my son just got diagnosed with ADHD last week. He's
wow.
10, and I thought maybe I was going to ask if you guys had any stories or anything for something like that he could read or we could read to understand more clearly and stuff like that.
I mean, the robot ADHD one is pretty comical. Or I got kind of a comedic, lighthearted feel from it. And it's a queer robot. So that's another spin on it. And I feel like that one is definitely one that could be read at any level and not, it's not like dark and depressing or scary. And that's one thing I think we should mention is sometimes I think people hear disability and they go, oh, everything's going to be dark and depressing. But no, we got some sad stories in there, but we balance out the range of emotions with some other stories as well. But I definitely think the ADHD robot one would be a good read.
Excellent. Well, I would hope they're all not depressing because that would just put a bad spin on everything you're talking about. If you left it like depressed.
Exactly.
No, I think there's a great capacity. Like, I think sometimes in media, people with disabilities or people with neurodivergencies are portrayed in certain ways that almost seem either too overly inspirational or overly limiting and or overly depressing. And so I think that was why it was so important to us, like, to have these stories actually written by people. Like, I can count how many times I've watched like an ADHD character, an autistic character do something that like doesn't resonate with my communities, because they're not usually written by people with those, lived experience in those areas. And it's not to say that you can't write them if you don't have lived experience, but like if you're going to write it, try to be accurate. Like I know there's that show about the doctor who's on the spectrum where he's like, I'm a surgeon, and he starts like melting down, and a lot of people that didn't resonate with them. And like certainly as an autistic person, like I've struggled with autistic meltdowns. It's not something that's very public. It's not something that very many people see except maybe my spouse. But like having somebody involved to give the input of like, this is what this actually looks like. And that like we experience joy, we experience life just like everybody else. Like that's important too.
And I think one thing that Aubrey and I both dislike is when somebody says that you have this but deep down it's like a superpower. And it's like, no, let's keep it real, people. And thankfully we didn't, because they were submitted by people with the lived experiences, we didn't get anything like that where it's like, oh, this is unrealistic kind of thing. So we were happy about that. We're very happy with the turnout of the stories.
Yeah, that's really good because, like I've got my own psychological mental health stuff, and I've just gotten a lot of different chronic pains over the last year and a half. So I'm always a fan as well of kind of trying to find the balance, and everybody's balance is different too, right? Hey, here's the joy and the happiness you can see, and also here's where it really sucks, and also here are the days where you're just there. And it's really good to see that because like I feel like there are like books and stories, maybe even comics I've seen where people they touch the surface of what these illnesses are. And again, these are short stories in anthology, so there's only so far they could go, of course, but yeah, even from what I saw with just the sampler stories we had, like I felt more like, wow, like I can tell these are run by people that have these, that understand what these conditions are like for them. And I'm I know what my limitations with my stuff would be if I was gonna try to make a comic, which is half the reason I haven't tried it. I'm interested I guess just to hear about, for you all, since you all are very open about, your own personal things as well, what was it like, for your process? Because not only are you both editors on this, you're both writers as well. So you're trying to work with all these different people, get their stuff in, make sure they're taken care of, also make sure that you can afford everything for the comic and all that. And on top of that, you want to tell your stories and work with the other creators on that. So how in the world do you both manage that?
Well, what's been really nice is I always emphasize this is Aubrey, Anas, and I all three deal with something, but we've all been able to lean on each other. So when one of us is starting to feel overwhelmed, we need to take a step back. We support that, and we'll pick up the necessary slack there for a little bit because I know I'm going to need it a little bit later, maybe, and then Aubrey might need it after that. And so, thankfully, there's some skill overlap, but we also have our individual lanes that we're kind of really good at. But thankfully, especially with Aubrey and Anna, it's both having a kind of like a graphic design eye. They definitely can help each other. They've been helping each other out a lot when one of them needs to take a step back, and I'm very happy that they're on board because there's no way I could do some of the stuff that they do.
No, it's a team
Yeah.
effort, and it's the same for me. When we were putting the anthology together, we each like shared our stories as well. And if the other two editors said, nope, this isn't going to cut it, we would have not put them in the book. Like it was important to us that we tried to be as fair as possible in that process. And I was telling them both of the co-editors that like my story is going to come in last minute. Like I've known the runway of when we're going to have these stories due for, months before everybody else. But I kept saying it's going to come in last minute because my brain will not be willing to finish the story. And I have had notes in my notes app about this story for a year. Like I looked back because like Taylor Swift released a song called Cassandra, and my song's called, or my story is called The Ballad of Cassandra. And like I said, it's about autistic pattern recognition, where you can like kind of predict things before they happen, and it kind of seems like a superpower, but people never believe you. So that's why it's, after Cassandra. And so I was like, I need to make sure like I had this in my notes app before that all came out, just for my own validity. But yeah, I told both of them like this story, I will not have the script until like the deadline is here.
Yeah.
And I just knew that that's how my brain was going to work. And I think I told you guys that like 30 days beforehand. Like when we opened submissions, I knew where my brain was going to land with this. And I've been dealing with burnout since like 2020. So sometimes that's the only way to like get myself to go creatively is like to have that deadline, because that's how my brain works. And I don't know, for me too, like this process has been a process in accepting where my ADHD and my autism is disabling to me. And I've been working through that for like 2 years. But like when we did Tales from the Cloakroom, I put the pedal on the gas and went as fast as I could, and I can't do that anymore. It takes a real toll on me. And so I just had to kind of admit that like that's not something I can do. And I think like you had said, Lauren, that you've struggled with your own mental health stuff, and that's why you haven't like put your foot forward on a comic. And it's hard. Like some people just let that, like it's flowing out of them like a huge waterfall. And some of us have like a sea of water inside of us, and it just doesn't flow out like we want it to. And so sometimes it's figuring out how to court your creative process again, and figure out, if you've ever had access to it, how to access it like you used to. And you may never be able to access it like you used to. Like there's so many barriers, and they vary across all of us. So that's why I think this anthology is so important, is because there's a lot more barriers for people who are disabled or neurodivergent than people who are not, or fully abled and neurotypical.
And I was the complete opposite of Aubrey. I had my story done like before day one. I was like, because I know that I have with my fibromyalgia, I got it like 3 or 4 good hours a day that I have to do everything in, and if I'm lucky. And so I was like, I've got to get the story done up front because I've got to have the energy to read the scripts and give feedback on those after we read the scripts and all of that. And so I was the exact opposite of Aubrey. But yeah, I knew Aubrey's would be coming in last minute. I was like, that's just how Aubrey works. That's what she's got to do. And so we were definitely on the opposite ends of the spectrum there.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I appreciate y'all saying that. And yeah, Aubrey, I completely get that because, like, I think the last maybe year and a half, 2 years, I've been struggling with finding my creative process again. And I still haven't figured it out completely. And part of that is the mental health stuff, and part of that's life changes, and then the chronic the chronic pain, illness, whatever on top of it. It's just a whole thing. And so it always amazes me to see people that not only have things that are, even, they have their own barriers, as you said, and they're still able to do all these things. Because then I'm like, well, shit, if they can do that, what the fuck am I doing? And comparison, is often not helpful in these situations.
It's
But
such
like,
a trap. It's such a trap.
yeah,
Like, let me just say that out loud to anybody who watches this. That's a trap. And we all get into it. So all of the co-editors have had discussions about feeling like they're not doing enough, or imposter syndrome. And like, all of us are doing a lot of stuff. All of us are making sure that this project happens. Like, those beautiful banners, Anas made those on the Kickstarter with like the names of everybody who's working on things. Like, I made some of the graphics for social media. Like, we all are putting things into this. And the reason why it's not a crushing weight is because all of us are carrying a little bit of the weight, together. But no,
Yeah.
I have that same thing of like, oh, man, this person's Is that your
Sorry,
puppies?
can you hear my dogs? Yeah, sorry.
Yes.
Somebody's outside. I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
No, you're fine.
They wanted to be heard too.
But like, it's easy to look at other people and go, oh man, they're going so much faster than me, or they're getting like, they're so much younger than me. Cause like, we're both, I'm almost 40. I'll be 40 next year. And I won't reveal Chris's age. That's not fair. I shouldn't have done that. We're both very young. We're super young.
Hey, 40's still young.
We have a friend in our Discord who's younger than us. He's in his 20s, and occasionally he'll say things like, "Oh my gosh, you guys are old," and I'm like, "George, we're not. We're very young."
Yeah, I can't. Yeah, see, I did that in my early 20s. I'm 29 right now, and because of all, especially like the chronic pain I have and things like that, when people hear about it, they're just like, "Oh my god." And I'm like, yep, I'm basically 80. How's it going? So
yeah. Well, and I think you can't compare yourself like age-wise. I saw something
Right.
recently that went around on, I think, X and Blue Sky or Twitter and Blue Sky. I try not to call it the other thing. Was like, when did you start your career? When did it take off? And a lot of people, they were in their 40s, like, so don't compare yourself. Like, and I also like had a whole another life before this. Like, I have a background, I got my degree in special education, and I was a lead teacher for 4 or 5 years, like teaching special ed pre-K. So I worked with a bunch of little kids with disabilities. And I mean, that also informs my work here, that like, it gives me a background into many different communities that I may not personally be a part of. And I think it helps me kind of know what the scope and the sphere is, other than just knowing what I have. So like, your life's going to change, and you're going to go through different iterations of yourself. And I think for all of us, it's kind of like, how can we lean towards our truer self, or the self that makes us happy? And comparison, like they say, is the thief of joy. So you're never going to feel good if you're like, oh man, I'm not as good as this person, but you really don't know what that person's dealing with, or why they are the way they are. Like,
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah.
I've always said that self-awareness is one of the most important things anybody could ever have. Because if you know yourself and your own limitations, and you just stick to that, then you're going to be good. Compared to letting anybody else's influence affect you or anything. As long as you know your limitations and where you're at, and you stick to that, then you should be able to accomplish your goals. Like, I think self-awareness is incredibly important. And I believe even more if you have some form of disability or something like that, to know your own personal limitations, so you don't take anything personal somebody else would say.
Or even just, we've talked about this a lot, CK and I, like, knowing your limits and knowing when you need to rest. Like, rest is radical for people with disabilities and neurodivergence, because like, Like I said, I went to FanX Salt Lake today. I think I said it maybe before we were recording. But I had to drive from my mom's house to my in-laws' house, and I sat in the dark for an hour because I knew I was just overstimulated, and then I was gonna have to go be in social situations that's very overstimulating, and then do this interview, which is absolutely joyful and not at all nerve-wracking. No, I'm kidding. I'm really having a good time. But like I knew today was going to be a lot, and so I built in some time to just sit in the dark because I struggle with a lot of sensory processing issues, and so making space for ourselves, because there's another saying that like if you don't choose when to rest, your body will choose for you, and that's
Yep.
especially true for us, I would say. Would you agree, Chris?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Lauren, to build off of what you said with what you've been dealing with and everything, is I started having symptoms when I was 24, and I'm now 44, so I've been dealing with it for 20 years. And I think one thing that helps me when I hear younger creators compare themselves to other people so much is I think with time, at one point I was like, I can't get into comics. I can't do that. I have to spend my energy on the handful of hours each week that I can work. I've got to go work and make a living.
Yeah.
And and then in the recent years, I was like, hey, like during COVID when I took Scott Snyder's writing classes, I think was around COVID. And I was like, let's see what happens here. Let's see what I think of this. Why not try it out? And now I'm hooked and I can't stop. But I know my limits, and I know that at certain points I've got to just shut it down for the day, or else I'm gonna mess up my body and things like that. And I think in hindsight, that's one of the benefits of having the condition for so long is that I've learned my limitations. Now, don't get me wrong, I still get imposter syndrome. I still get like upset sometimes, but I think I have a better grasp on it. So give yourself some grace for sure. You will adapt to it and you will learn. And it's if you have to deal with this for a long time, and you get used to it. You learn the rituals that you need to go through, the habits you need to form, the good habits.
Yeah. No, and I appreciate that, and I honestly think that can help anybody, regardless if you're neurodivergent, have disabilities, or other limitations, or don't even. But yeah, it's good to hear that because I think too, nowadays people, especially younger generation, which is wonderful, they're even more open than my generation has been on mental illness and limitations, disabilities, things like that. But comics, it's I feel like in comics it's harder to hear the younger creators, I will say. And I don't know if that's because there are less of them, which I doubt, to be honest. But I think, kind of like to Aubrey's point, a lot of people find their creative passions or the passions in general they really love when they're older.
Yeah.
Which is great. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And it's also like, yeah, like young creators really need to hear and actually see these things. So, and by seeing people that actually have gone through it and are still going through their own things, actually do it. It's just so cool. And it's so cool that you all are really trying to not only spearhead, what you're going through, but also give other stories and other people and what they're going through a platform as well. Cause that's one thing that I was thinking about too is how do you choose the stories? I mean, I'm sure there are all kinds of different things, but I'm just most interested in, like you three as editors clearly have your own disabilities, neurodivergence, all that. And if you pick a story that none of you have, that what they're talking about, how does that work?
So go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Okay. So one thing we wanted to make sure that we did is that we didn't have an overlap in conditions too much, except for maybe ADHD, because there's so many different variables in play that you could speak to,
Yep.
different like approaches. And so that was one thing we took into consideration. And I would make little notes beside each thing in a spreadsheet about what condition it was dealing with and things like that. And really, honestly, I just felt like we went with the stories that resonated emotionally with us the most. It
Yeah.
didn't, and it just so happened that that worked out to be across the spectrum. And we had, when we did the tally up of when deciding which stories to make it in, and these were the ones we would make a yes, no, maybe column for each story. And at the end of the day, when we looked at the yeses and we looked at them, and we had to cut a handful of them, unfortunately. But the ones we ended up with, it was an even split between neurodiversity and disabilities. And then also there was hardly any overlapping conditions. And so we got really lucky that way because we really just wanted the best stories. And what if all the best stories happened to be about diabetes? Then
Right.
we'd be in trouble. But thankfully they ran the spectrum, and so we got really lucky there.
And with the neurodivergent stories, like some of them, being both being ADHD and autistic, the robot story I identified with, there's another story that goes into sensory overload that like I was like, oh my gosh, it's like you went into my brain and like plucked it out. Like I've told that creator, Chuck, that like through my editing process with him, Chuck, I've been like, man, this resonates so strongly with me. Like I said, like needing to go sit in a dark room, like that's not like I didn't realize that I would do that. Like even before I had any diagnoses, like I would take sensory breaks and I was working to accommodate myself and I'd tell people things and people didn't understand. And some people were nice about it. Some people were not nice about it. But like I think a lot of those stories are going to resonate even with people who maybe aren't disabled or neurodivergent. We're humans at the end of the day. Like things are still hard. Miscommunications or struggles happen for everybody, but I think it is important to highlight the different things we deal with, because sometimes people really minimize what we're dealing with. And that is so frustrating. Like I have a lot of sensory stuff around food. And I remember having a friend who was just like, oh my gosh, why can't you just like, we had a D&D night and every week someone would bring food and I would usually eat beforehand, like in secret, so that like if I got there and I couldn't eat the food that they'd made, I wasn't going to starve for 3 or 4 hours.
Yeah, absolutely.
And when I kind of told my friend that, she was really resistant to it. She was like, well, if we just cooked it like this, you'd eat it, like you'd like it. And I was like, no, it's not something that's within my control. I'm not just picky. It is like I get absolutely disgusted with certain textures, certain tastes. And I'll vomit. It's not a fun thing to have. I'm not being picky to be difficult. It's just something I have to deal with every day. And like I'm lucky that I have a spouse who's very understanding. So now when we go into situations, he's very supportive. But like, yeah, there's things that we deal with, and we have to have sympathy and kindness for each other, and acceptance is a really important thing.
And building off of Aubrey's example there, with each story, we really wanted to accomplish three things. We wanted to make sure they were entertaining, first of all, because why in the world would you read it if it's not entertaining? We wanted to make sure it was kind of teachable, where like even I'm learning, I don't know everything about every disability, and so it's given us a chance to learn a little bit. It's teachable moments in there was like, whoa, I didn't know that. Like Aubrey just said, I'm not even sure I knew that about the eating thing with the textures.
I don't think I've told you. I don't think
Yeah.
it's something we've ever discussed. Yeah.
And so each story has that teachable moment. And then, of course, three, we wanted them to be emotional in some aspect, whether it was like really joyful and inspirational, or whether it was, sad and making you feel for that person in their situation. So we really wanted to accomplish, all three of those things in each story. And I think we did. I think we have a killer anthology. I've said this several times. I know Anas has said this. We really feel like we have an award-winning anthology on our hand. If we can just get it made and get it out there and get eyes on it and get the right eyes on it, then we really think we have an award winner. And that's not just tooting our own horns, because we didn't write all these stories, like they did, right? And the artists are going to be the ones creating, and the letters are going to be the ones creating it and bringing it to life. It's out of our hands kind of at that point once we get so far down the road. And but comparing this to like other anthologies, because I read a lot of anthologies and stuff like that, I just think that we have an amazing one on our hands that can really go far.
Yeah, I would agree just by what I've seen so far, honestly, and
Thank you.
hearing how passionate you are as editors and creators in it as well. And again, like I really feel like I can tell just how passionate all the people obviously that you chose. I don't know the other stories that didn't make it, unfortunately, but all the people that you chose, like they really were pouring themselves into it. So I'm sure that it means so much to them as well to be able to get those stories out, whether it's their first one, whether it's their 50th one or their 20th anthology of the year they're in. Like, you know, these are very raw stories, I feel like. And that makes them more accessible, I think, almost to everyone. Because I really loved your guys' answer to, how did you pick stories, even if you didn't have that disability or didn't have that same neurodivergence or what have you, and you all were like, it was the emotion. And that's my favorite part of storytelling in general, is the emotions that it can, that any story can bring out in us. It's just so fascinating. That's also one of the reasons I love wrestling, because they tell stories and they make you feel things even when you don't want to. So you're like, I hate this person. Then somebody looks at you and goes, you're supposed to. They're doing great. And you're like, fuck.
Yeah. No, I think that sorry, my brain went blank for a second there. But even the stories we weren't able to take into the anthology, like a few people asked for feedback, and it was really important to me. Like I took some time to like give them specific notes to their story about like why it didn't quite work for us. Because I know that the submission process is especially about something like this, where you're writing about something that's so close to your heart. Like that's putting yourself on the line. So like I didn't want anybody to feel like we were dismissive or anything like that. Like if you reached out for feedback, and if you didn't reach out for feedback and you wish you got it, reply to our email. I'll review it and give you editorial feedback. That's one thing too, Lauren. I was like, if you need a cheerleader to say write that story, that's another reason why I like being an editor, because I want to cheerlead everybody. I want to tell everybody, like, it may take you longer, it may be harder, but you can do this if this is something you really want. And so you can do this if it's something you want to do. Like, and not in a like silly inspirational way, in a way that like if it's something you want to do someday, I believe in you. I think you can do it. And so like it was important to me to like, and to both of us, like we've both done that. We've given our friends and people we're involved with like feedback. Chris is a top-notch copy editor. Like they are so much better than even I am at that. Like I'm like so impressed with their skills. Like they can pick out things that I, like, my brain just doesn't always see. And so I think it's important to like continue to support this community in comics, because there are so many cool stories to tell, and there's so many different perspectives that maybe we're not seeing, or maybe we are seeing, but they're like Batman villains, like not in the best way possible,
Yeah, absolutely. Aubrey, I feel like you're like the Mary Poppins of comics. Like you're just like, I just want everyone to feel like they can do it because they have it somewhere if they want to. I love that. You can steal that moniker too. Take it and run
Okay,
with it.
cool. I collect monikers. So like I've got a little bit of Natasha Romanoff. Chris has called me Oracle before. Like I'll just keep collecting them and put them on my resume.
I was gonna say that's perfect. You should get like a little like art portrait done or something to put on your wall that has like all your favorite monikers you've gotten. That'd be
there
cool.
we go. Yes.
I was going to say, Aubrey, you sound like Lauren talking to me.
Oh, good.
So you can write that. Do it.
I think we should all cheer each other on. Like I say this all the time. Rising tides lifts all boats. Like there's no reason to put each other down. We can all do this together.
Yeah, I love it. I can't disagree. And yeah, Chase has secret stuff going on. I think there's stuff I don't even know based on what he said earlier, but it's fine.
It's not that far yet, but hopefully I wanted to get stuff started sooner, but it's taking its time. My brother is a very busy man, but
he's
gonna
do great.
Artist. I'm writing a story. My brother's illustrating it, so
it takes
fun.
Comics take so much longer than anybody realizes.
Oh, I know.
They take a while. It's okay it feels like it takes forever, but you'll get, like, we all get there when we get there.
Right.
And the time it's taken him to do a little bit of illustrating. I've already written like 3 other stories. But that's how it goes.
That's how writing goes, I guess. So yeah, the Kickstarter is going on right now. Still, you've got 21 days to go. You're pretty close to your goal already with that much time. Now, again, I'm not going to jinx anything. I know how Kickstarters work. I know there are slowdown periods and things like that. So we're not going to jinx anything, but I'm super excited because I think so many people want to be seen they want to be heard, and I think a lot of people are looking for something like this and something that's tangible. I'm sure there are digital copies or what have you, but I think people really want something to be like, this is the thing I identified with, and this is the thing that helped me, get to this point with whatever I'm dealing with. So I think it's really cool. Is there anything else in particular that we need to know about the Kickstarter?
I'm trying to think.
We do want to emphasize intersectionality. So, these stories involve disabilities and involve neurodivergence, but we also want to include people of color in the stories. We also want to include queer, 2S LGBTQIA plus stories in there. And so that was important as well when we were going through the process is having a good chunk of stories like that. And I would say at least 25%, represent, different communities. And so that was another important thing for us to highlight. Yeah. Can you think of anything else?
Yeah, I think it's just like I know when we announced some of the project on like Twitter, we got some trolling and pushback about like, oh, do we really need this? Blah blah blah. And it's like these are people who have these conditions telling their own stories or telling stories that are adjacent, that their condition's just a part of it. Like I said, with my story, it's just that like it's just a part of the story. It's not necessarily the story. And but like however the story is, it's people writing from their own perspective, and like we get to do that. We get to dream of ourselves in different worlds, or we get to tell you what our inner life is like or what our experiences are, just like any other writer does, or any other creator, or any other artist or colorist or letterer, like that's important too. So like I just think it's a level of authenticity that was really important to us.
I think just because it's not made for that one person doesn't mean it's not made for somebody, and they just need to realize that.
Or a lot of people will benefit from this.
I would like to highlight one of our tiers as you can get drawn into the book. And so I really am a fan of that one. They'll probably, I don't know if I've said this to Aubrey, but they would probably end up being either drawn into her story or mine because of there's certain scenes that I have in mind that I think they'd be really good to get drawn into. And so with that, it's all inclusive. So you get the book, you also get the bookmark, which has been a really popular seller. You also get all 3 art prints of the covers by Al Acevedo, Arthur Cabezas, and Skylar Patridge. You get
Skylar's so good.
yeah, for real. So it's like all inclusive. So it's a really good deal, and you get to see yourself in the book, and that's really cool. I think people who are allies everybody knows somebody in their life who has one of these conditions, and it's cool to see yourself in the book in general, like with your condition or even just other people dealing with disabilities. But it's really, really cool to like literally see yourself in the book. And so I just wanted to highlight that tier. I think it's really cool. We are limiting it to 5, but and we've got I think 2 sold already. But I just think it's a really cool tier.
Yeah, it is, and we've both done that on other campaigns. CK and I, we've been drawn into other stuff, and it's fun when that art comes back, and you're like, that's me, that's my face.
Yeah, and honestly, like that's one of the more affordable, like get drawn into comics I've seen. Because usually they're like hundreds at minimum, and again, rightfully so in terms of the artists doing it and such. But yeah, this is a lot more affordable, I think. So that's really cool.
Yeah, I think we priced everything really well. You can get the digital copy for 12. You can get a digital bundle, another highlight that's 300 pages of digital comics for $6, and those have already been either written by the 3 editors or edited by the 3 editors. One or the other. Like Aubrey edited some of them, Anas has written some of them, Anas just got nominated for a Ringo, and we were able to get Etheris, that Ringo-nominated book, in there into the collection.
I love that book so
and that's
much.
just $6. That's $6 for 300 extra pages of comics. And then our physical books are very reasonably priced, $20, then $22, then for Skylar, you know how Skylar is, that amazing cover, we priced it a little higher at $25, but still very reasonable. and so we're excited across the board with all these. But I did want to highlight the tiers really quickly so that people understood their options there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. And I like that, again, you guys just have so many different options for people. I think that's one of the best things about Kickstarter is that it really puts it in the hands of the consumers once it's out in terms of just like, hey, I want this, I want this. And I know also like there have been Kickstarters and, especially like after one campaign successful and, creators might do another one after and they're like, hey, what'd you guys like? What didn't you like? What do you want this time? I think that's really cool and unique. It's really hard to do that on other platforms, especially with comics. So
Yeah, for sure.
Chase, did you have any more questions for CK or Aubrey?
I mean, not really. They kind of went over everything that I had written down here.
Chase is the one that keeps me in line. He actually takes notes and writes things down. I stopped doing that about a year and a half ago. So
I'm always the one who has the script written down and all the talking points and stuff like that. I got to bring something to this relationship,
Oh, you bring a lot. Well, CK, Aubrey, any last thoughts, anything last second you wanted to share before we again highlight how much time's left in the Kickstarter and wrap it up?
Just that there's just a lot of good stories that we really want to share with you. So please go support it.
Yeah, and get the word out there. I mean, social media is it does not help that much like it used to. So get the word of mouth out there. Just tell your friends about it. Tell your friends' friends about it. Like I said, everybody knows somebody that can relate to this. And be a good ally and get out there and root for us and tell and get us out with word of mouth. I think that's the best way to go at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, listen, I know you guys still have a ways to go to your goal, but you have already 240 people that are donating money to this and saying that this is like awesome and they want it. So like, I don't know about you, but like to me, like even though it's like, yeah, to make this much money, you need like thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of people. I'm like 240 people care about this already. Like we can get that number to 300 too. Like it can grow. So I think we should get to 300, 350, 400. I think it's going to happen.
Let's
Fingers
hope so.
crossed.
Chase, anything you wanted to add before we wrap it up?
No, I just wanted to thank them both for being here and for talking to us about. You did a great job pitching your story, or pitching your book, the anthology. It sounds wonderful. I've been lucky enough to read 3 of them already, and I am very interested in seeing how the rest of them go. So I'm just really excited to see this get backed.
Well, thank you. And thank y'all for having us for sure. It's been fun.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
It's been a blast. I've had a really good time.
Good. Well, thank you. Yeah. Thank you both for coming on. And again, I know you both also probably had to find your way to make it work into your day and keep yourself sane and all that. So really appreciate that. I never take that lightly because I'm in the process of learning how I have to do that as well. So thank you guys so much for coming on. It's been great having you both on. Sad that Anas couldn't join us, Anas, but that's okay. I will bother them later, very happily so. But yeah,
Me too.
Hopefully you guys have other stories coming out that you can come on again and we can talk to you again.
Yeah,
Definitely. That'd be awesome.
We'll definitely reach out again.
I'll say I'm looking forward to part 2 already. Again, not trying to jinx it. I've got a wooden desk here I knocked on, so we're covered.
I'll knock
But yeah,
behind
again,
me.
thank you both for being on. Chase, as always, thanks for being here and being such a great co-host. Those you guys that have been watching, what have you, be sure to check out the Kickstarter. It is linked below, so you can just click and not think twice. Just click a few times, and you're gonna get something great no matter what you click on. So don't worry about it. Check Kickstarter, definitely back it, pass on to your friends, family, what have you. And of course, you can find them on their social medias as well. I linked a couple of them below, I think. So whatever you use, I'm sure you can find them what they're on. And yeah, if you guys like what you see here, like, share, and subscribe, all that cheesy stuff. Helps me get more motivated too, but that's okay. And yeah, other than that, we'll see you guys next time in the Nerdy Neighborhood.